Join us, we learn Chumash for today, Tuesday, Parshas Terumah, chapter 25, verse 32. Yesterday we learned in the Chumash about the construction of the table, how it was made, the bread, the showbread that was put on the table, as well as the cover of the ark and the krubim that came from the cover of the ark. Today we'll be learning about the construction of the menorah and the structure of the actual tabernacle. Verse 31. V'asisa menorah zahav, and you shall make a candelabra of gold, of pure tohir, it should be pure gold. Miksha teyasa, it should be formed by hammering it. Hamenorah, the menorah should be made, the candelabra. It will have in it multiple parts. Yirecha, it will have a base. Kana, its stem. Gviya, its goblets. Kafterah, its spheres. Prachel, its flowers. Mimena yiu should all be an integral part of this menorah. Rashi explains what this means. In verse 31, Rashi. Miksha teyasa menorah. The menorah itself should be made out of one piece. Shalayasa nechulyes, you should not make it of separate parts. You shouldn't make each arm a separate piece and then eventually afterwards put them all together like the people who usually shape and do these kinds of things. Talking about blacksmiths who do these kinds of things. All of them should come from one piece of gold. And then with a chisel he bangs out the exact shape of the menorah. And then he cuts it with his tools. And then will separate the stems to each side until it gets the shape of a candelabra. Miksha, meaning one piece. Targumay negid loshin amshacha, from you have to pull it from one place to the next. Shemamshich eivarim in a eshes, that he pulls out the stems from the solid piece of gold, and then you pull the gold branches going, the arms going to each side. Lukan to each side, and how is this done? Ba'koshes hakurnas, by banging the hammer on it. V'liloshin miksha, however, but if you look at the word miksha, that does not mean to stretch, but that comes from the word makas kurnas, like banging something out. Nokshan, like we mentioned before about Belshazzar, that we find that the terminology that's used, that when he was nervous and afraid, his feet were banging against each other. Te'asa menorah, what does it mean? The word te'asa sounds like it will be made, not that you should make it. And Rashi explains this is because me'eleh was made on its own. Why was it made on its own? Because Moshe, when Moshe was told about making the menorah, he tried making it and it was very difficult. So God told him, take this kikar of gold, throw it into the fire, and it will be made on its own. Therefore, in this case, it doesn't say, you shall make the menorah, but it will be made. And it was made by God, by Moshe throwing it into the fire. Girecha is the base, who are regel shalamata osikamin teva. This was the foot on the bottom, which was made like a box. And then ushleisha raglaim yasim emenu lamata. There was like a little box on the bottom that the actual stem, the center stand, stood in the menorah, and from it 3 little legs came out. Vikana, the word kana, the stem, is the middle branch that stood in the middle, and from there the other 6 branches came out from. Zokuf klabimaila, which was facing towards up, it was vertical. For all of Neram Tzaya, and on it was the middle candle. Osikamin Bazach was made like a bowl. Lotzeik Hashem and L'Seiche, to pour the oil into it. For Losis Apsila, and to place the wick. Gviya, its cups, its goblets. In Kamin Kaisa Shaisim Mitzchuchis, it's just like the cups that you have that are made out of glass. Aruchim Uktsarim, that they are long and narrow. V'koidon Lahem Medirnis Belaz, Ve'elasui Mazav. These, however, were made from gold, built in V'yetzimikol Kanavakan, and they would be sticking out, coming out from every one of the branches. Kaminyan Shanasam Amakosov, as the Torah will soon enumerate how many should be coming out of each branch. These were not used, they did not put anything in these goblets, they were only there for beautification. Kafterel, these spheres, kemin tapuchim agulim zav, like round apples, meaning round balls, boltim svivis hakana, that would surround every branch, just like the candelabras that are there in front of great ministers, pimblish, the amount of them. Because of a parsha, the Torah continues to say how many spheres were then sticking out on each one of the menorahs, and how much space there had to be between each button. They were shaped and formed as like a flower. What does this mean? All these items, the spheres, the flowers, the goblets, should all be coming out of the stem, out of one piece, not made into separate pieces and then attached together. It should all be part of one piece. Verse 32. You'll have 6 branches coming out of the side of the center of pole. You'll have 3 poles coming out from one side, 3 branches coming out on one side, and 3 branches will be coming out on the other side of the candelabra. Rashi says, lekanu on both sides, ba'alachsoin, on an angle. As we know that Rashi and the Rambam, as the Rebbe mentioned many times from the picture that the son of the Rambam wrote, and over here we see Rashi says it as well, that the actual branches were straight on an angle, like a V, not rounded. And they will continue to go up until the height of the menorah, which that was the center pole. So each one of the poles of the menorah, each one of the branches came out as a V, reaching the same height as the center pole, so all flames should be an equal height. Each one then, in order, because it would all have to be equal to the same height, each pole came out higher than the next, 3 branches on each side, first a longer one, a shorter one, and then a shorter one. This way they will all be the same height as the center. They would all equal the same height of the middle center branch, which from there all the other 6 branches would come out. 33, the Torah continues. Then there shall be 3 engraved goblets. They will also be on the center, on each branch, kafter v'ferach, as well as a sphere and a flower. You will have 3 cups, which would be then engraved on each branch, kafter v'ferach, again with a sphere and a flower. This will be applied to all 6 branches that extending from the stem, center stem of the candelabra. Mishukadim, what does the word mishukadim mean? Engraved. This is what they would usually do for gold and silver things, that they would engrave, carve out these kinds of shapes and ornaments. And 3 goblets built on every single one of the branches. There were 3 goblets that were engraved, protruding from them. So too there was a flower and a sphere coming out from each one. The Torah then continues in verse 34. And on the actual menorah itself, and on the kabbalah, on the stem, on the center of the candelabra, you would have arba gvim. There would be 4 goblets, mishukadim engraved, kaftereo fracha, including its spheres and flowers. What does he mean, ba menorah, when he refers to the word menorah? So Rashi explains, we're talking about here, begufa shel menorah, the center stem of the candelabra was called the menorah. There were 4 cups. There was one that was on the bottom, not connected to all the other branches. And then you had, and then the other 3 were together, just like in par, and parallel to the other 6 branches, which also had 3 cups coming out of them. So too, this one as well, on the top had 3 cups, and then on the bottom there was another cup and sphere and bottom. This is one of the 5 verses in the Torah, that there is no clear, concise way how to decide how it should be done. I don't know. When we talk about the word Meshukadim engraved, Gviyim Meshukadim, is it only talking about the goblets should be the ones engraved, but the flowers and the spheres were not? Oy Meshukadim Kaftereo Frecha. Or do I say that they were engraved together with the flowers and the spheres, and therefore, as the flowers and the spheres as well, were part of it? Meaning, when we look at the word over here, and that the menorah had these 4 cups, is it referring to as well as the flowers and the spheres, or not? Verse 35, and then you're going to have the kafter tacham, there shall be one sphere situated below the 2 branches. And then there'll be another sphere, shall be situated next to the next 2 branches. That means every place where the 2 branches on both sides join will be a sphere that they connect with. So it should be for all the 6 branches coming out of the menorah. So in total you have 9 flowers, 11 spheres, 22 goblets that were on the actual candelabra. Rashi, the kafter tacha shnei akanim, meaning on the center pole, that you had the sphere in the middle and the center pole, and from that sphere the 2 branches came out like a V. That's the way we learned in the Brayso and the Balachas HaMishkan, and it gives us the idea and tells us as follows. The height of the menorah was 18 handbreadths. How did that work out? The feet, the base with its legs, were 3 tvachim with the first flower. Then, that's the flower that we mentioned that was on the base. From there, tfachayim cholok, you had 2 tfachim, 2 handbreadths that were empty. Tefach shaboy gevia, then you had another one, and on top of that, you had another handbreadth, you had the goblet, which was one of the 4 goblets that we mentioned previously that was on the bottom. The kafter referach mishnei kafterim. Then you would have 1 sphere, 1 flower from the 2 spheres and flowers that we mentioned before that were on the center pole itself. Shenemer mushukadim kafterei frecha, like we learned in the previous verse that it had to be engraved with flowers and spheres. And then lamadnu shayibekana. So from here we learned that on the center pole there were shnei kafterim u'shnei frachim. There were 2 spheres and 2 flowers. Levad min hashleisha kafterim sheyakanim nimshachim eteicha. Besides for the 3 spheres that from there each one of the poles extended from, each one of the branches extended from, there was another sphere as well. Because as we mentioned previously in the verse that from that sphere the 2 branches would extend from. Now, continuing in the measurements, you have tvachayim cholok, then you had 2 handbreadths empty, tefach kafter shnei akanim, then you had a tefach, another tefach number 9. So we're up to the 9th handbreadth. You had the bottom where the 2 branches would come out. Where the 2 branches would come out to the height of the menorah. Then tefach number 10, handbreadth number 10, empty. Handbreadth number 11, again a sphere with the 2 branches coming out to Yitzim. On top of it, there was a tefach, a handbreadth that was empty. Then there was the 3rd one where the last set of branches would come out from. On top of that, you had tfachayim chalak, another 2 handbreadths empty. Nishtairu, so what you have left over, shleisha tfachim, 3 handbreadths. Shebem shleisha gvim, which had in it the 3 goblets, v'chafter v'ferach, with the button, with the sphere and the flower that was on each one, and the last top of the 3 tfachim, the last 3 handbreadths, which gives you a total of 18 handbreadths. So what we have over here is you have the 18 handbreadths. If you want to go from top to bottom, top 3, you had the goblet, the 3 goblets, the sphere and the button. Then beneath that, you had 2 empty tfachim, 2 empty handbreadths. Then you had, for the next 3 handbreadths, yet with each one a space in between of a handbreadth with the arms extending from those spheres. Then 2 handbreadths empty. Then again, another handbreadth where you had the goblet, sphere and button, 2 handbreadths empty, and then the last 3 of what the base was. What we have over here total, nimtza gviyim. So how many goblets do you have? Chav base 22, 18 l'shisha kanim, shloisha l'cholach v'yechad, 3 for each one. V'arba b'gufa shel menorah, and 4 in the actual center pole. Harei chav base, so you have 22 goblets. Achad asar kafterim, 11 spheres. Shisha b'kan sheish zakanim, 6 on each one of the poles. and 3 on the center pole, that the actual branches extended from them, and then Shnaim, then another 2, which were on the actual center pole itself. Shnemer, as it says, so there you have, you minus 2, you had 1 which was by the base, and then another one which was on the top, with the 3 cups. Then it had 9 flowers, 6 for each one of the poles, as it says. That it says in the central pole there should be a sphere and a flower. Then you had 3 for the center pole as well. Therefore, as it says in Parshas, if you look closely at the Mishnah that we mentioned before in the Brisa that was mentioned in the Talmud, you will see the exact number as we enumerated, that there were the 11, go through it again, was 9 flowers, 11 spheres, and 22 goblets. Verse 36. Kafteremu knesam, the spheres and the branches, mimenu yiyu, they should all be part of the actual menorah itself. Kula miksha achas of toyer, they all have to be hammered out of a single piece of pure gold. 37. And then you will make 7 lamps. Shiva, 7. The helas neideser, and then you will kindle its lamps. V'heir al ever panah, and they will shine towards the center. Esneriseh, what does it mean, the lamps? Kamin bezichin, like bowls which they would put the oil and the wicks in. What does it mean that it would shine inward? So Rashi says and explains, you will make the top of the 6 candles of the lamps, which are in the top of the branches, that are coming from the sides, that they should be leaning towards the center. So you had the right to the left, facing towards the center pole, where that was the center candle. They should all be centering and leaning towards the center, which that was the center of the menorah. Besides the actual menorah candelabra itself, there were tools that were used for the menorah as well. Its tongues and its scoops, zav ter, should be made out of pure gold. What do they need these tongues and scoops for? So Rashi tells us, they were the tongues that were used to take the wicks from the oil. They were probably more like a tweezers than tongues. And to be able to make them straight and make them leaning towards the candles as well. The reason why it's called milkachayim, its root word is lekach, to take, that these were used to grab, to take something. And the Unclus, the Targum, calls it tzviyasa because from the word tzvas, like we know in Ethics of Our Fathers, it uses the terminology, tongues are called tzvas. They were like little bowls, little scoops, that they would use it to collect the ash, that was in the candle, every single morning when the high priest, when he had to clean out the candles, that he would clean out all the little bowls from all the little ash after the wicks have burnt, that they were lighting all night, and they were now put out. The word machtaiseh comes from the word like a shovel, that they would scoop it out, and this was this little bowl that they would clean it with. This was all made from, verse 39, Kikar Zav Ter Yasa Isa, it should all be made together with all the utensils. This was made out of 1 talent of gold. And you'll see how this was made on the mountain. Rashi explains, verse 39, Kikar Zav Ter Shalayia Mishkala Im Kol Kila Ela Kikar, that everything, meaning all the vessels, should all only weigh 1 talent of gold. Lo pachus v'lo yoser, not more and not less. A talent of gold is about 48 kilograms, or in pounds, 106 pounds. V'akikar shel chol shishimana, that there were different types of talents of how they would measure it. That means the amount of how they would weigh the kikar would be only 60 mana. Shel kodesh hayakaful, when you go of kodesh, when you would measure it according to the weight for one that was used for the holy temple, it would be double the amount, was 120 mana. How much is a mana? So Rashi explains, how much is a mana based according to what was the ways and measurements in the time of Rashi. V'hamana hu litra shesheklim b'kesav l'mishkul kalunya. The mana, which was a regular one that they would weigh the gold for something that was not holy, was the measurement of a litra, which today they would use Rashi's time. He's referring to a colonia, and this was in Germany that they would make the coins from, that kind of weight that they would use in the kind of places in Germany, Spain, in France, in that area. And Vehaim, what is it? Weighed, Meya Ze'uvim was 100 dinar. Esrim v'chamisha sloim, 25 sloim. A sela is 4 zehuvim, is 4 dinar. So if you do a mana of holy, which was 50 sloim, which is double of what was the unholy one, so it comes out that a kikar was 1,500 dinar. A kikar of kodesh was then 3,000 dinar. This is just the calculations of how they would calculate things for the holy temple or things that would use on a private life. Verse 40. And then observe how these forms were being made, that I show you here on the mountain, and this is the way you're going to make it. Rashi explains that God was telling Moshe, look the way I'm showing you what the form of the menorah is, that I'm showing it to you. Magid, this teaches us that Moshe found it difficult to understand how the menorah should be made. That God showed him a menorah made out of fire to show him exactly how it should be made, and therefore God uses the terminology as the image that you've seen on the mountain. As the Targum says, that mitchaze betura that you see on the mountain. If it would have said mare, not more, then it would be an action in the present. You should show it to others. Now that there's a comment, more that mischazi is something that you see, that somebody else shows it to you. There's a mara that you're showing to others, and then there's something that somebody shows to you. Over here, God was showing it to him, and therefore he uses that terminology. Chapter 26. The Esa Mishkan. And now we move on to the coverings of the Mishkan and the actual building of the structure of the tabernacle. The Esa Mishkan and the actual covering of the Mishkan. Tasa you're going to make. Eser Yidiyas. 10 out of 10 tapestries. Sheish Mazar, they're going to be of linen twined. Vutcheles Vargamen Vesela Shani, as well with turquoise, purple, and scarlet. Maise Kruvim, they're going to be webbed in a design that will have in it Kruvim. Masa Choyshev Tasa Isam, you're going to make it in the special woven design that in it you will see the Kruvim. Rashi, Vesamishkan Tasa Sirius, now over here he's telling him the words liyisle. What's the purpose of what are you going to have these? What are these curtains going to be for? Liyisle legag lemechitzas mechutz lekrashim. These are going to be for roof and also as partitions out on top of the beams. Shekena yidiyas liyis macharei lechaseisa, because the curtains would hang over the beams to be able to cover them. Sheish masar tchelis vargaman telas shani. The word mashtar, which means twined, it says it first. And then afterwards it tells us about the turquoise, purple, and blue. Well, what is it telling us? So every single thread had in it was woven of 4 different kinds of thread. Echad shel pishtim, you had the linen. Shloisha shel tzemer, 3 kinds of wool, which was the blue, the turquoise wool, the purple, and the scarlet. V'chol chut v'chut, each thread, kafel shisha, then had to be double 6. Harei, me'arba, meaning shein shrurin yachid, chav dalit kfolin lachut. What you have over here then is when you take one thread that's made up of 6 threads, those 6 threads times 4, so you have of all 4 kinds. When you are going to weave them together, you're going to have 24 for each thread, because each one was double, so you have the 24 threads for each one of the threads that were then woven together to make these curtains. Kruvim Isachaychev. Kruvim, that within the weaving of the actual curtains, they wove in those shapes of the kruvim. not in a way that you would weave it through a needle, but it has to be woven into it that you should be able to see it from both sides. Parts of echad mikan, parts of echad mikan, meaning that while they wove it, you had one image when you saw it on this side, and one image when you saw it on the other side. For example, as Rashi says, Ari mitzadzeh, you saw a lion on one side, Venesha mitzadzeh, and then you saw an eagle on the other. Like they weave the different sashes made out of silk that they call paishisha. Verse 2. The length of every single one of these curtains, of these tapestries, were 28 cubits. And they were wide of each one of these tapestries would be 4 cubits. So it's 28 long, 4 amas wide. Achas for each one of these tapestries. Mida achas l'chol hayiriyas, it should be, all the tapestries should have the same size. Verse 3. Chamesh hayiriyas ti'aneh chayvres isha lachesa. You will have 5 tapestries shall be attached to one another. The chamesh hayiriyas chayvres isha lachesa. And then you'll have the other 5 shall be also attached one to the other. Thus you're going to have a total of 28 cubits by 20 cubits. Rashi, ti'aneh chayvres. You'll sew each one individually, 5 on their own and 5 on their own. This is the way the verse uses to use the female terminology. When it's something which is male, we'll use a male terminology. So wife one to its sister or man to his brother. Like we use the kruvim over there, it's a male terminology, so therefore he says man to his brother. How are you going to hook these together? Verse 5, Chamishim lulois, you shall make 50 loops. Tasa b'yiriya achas, you're going to make on the edge of one of the tapestries, bakotza, at the edge of it. The Chamishim lulois, and another 50 loops. Tasa b'ktzei ha'yiriya asher b'machberes hashenis, you're going to make on the edge of the other set of tapestries. You'll have to make sure that the loops are aligned with each one of its counterparts. Rashi, lulois, what does lulois mean? Litzulish, anuvim, loops, lashina niva, like I make a bow, which this way you'll be able to connect the one with the other. You'll do it at the edge of the tapestry, and because you have a bunch of 5, so therefore it uses the terminology chayvares. So too you will make it. By the one that is the edge, at the edge of each one, there will be those loops, so you'll be able to connect them each one with the other. Magbilos, they have to be aligned. So over here, the Torah tells us, Shmoyer, you have to be careful and watch that they should be properly aligned. So therefore, the same loops that are done on one should be on the other. Because when you separate them, you should still see that the loops are aligned with one with the other. The word magbilus means zu keneged zu, one aligned to the other, opposing the other. Like from the word lekabil, targume shel neged lekabil, to accept that it should be there. Rashi then explains how the actual measurements of the tapestries of the Mishkan worked. And he says as follows. And if you put everything into proportion, he puts it this way. If you take the tapestries, Arkan, its length was Chofches, was 28 amos, 28 handbreadths. V'rachban, and its width was Arba, 4, like we explained before. So now when you connected the 5 together, Nimtza comes out, Rachban Etzrim, 5 times 4 is 20, and then the second one as well, which was 28 long. So it's 28 long by 20 wide. The Hamishkan, the actual tabernacle itself, was Arkei Shleishim Amis, was 30 amas long. Min HaMizrach al-Mayer, from east to west. Shenemer, as we're going to see, Esrim Krashim Ufas Negev Teimana, there were 20 poles that were there on the west side, on the south side, V'chein L'tzaf, and so too on the north side. The Chol Keresh Amma V'chetze V'Ama, and each beam was a amma and a half, a handbreadth and a half. Harei Shleishim, you have 30 amos going, you have 20 amos, each one was an am and a half, so you have 30. Min ha-mizrach l'mayrav, 20 times 1.5 equals 30, so from east to west you have 30 amos. Reichav ha-mishkan min ha-tzaf l'darim, the width of the Mishkan from north to south was 10 amos. Shenemer, as we're going to learn later, telling us how many poles should be there. Two in the corners. Harei eser, so you have a total of 10. So if you have 6 by 1.5 equals 9. Then you have 5 by 0.5, so you have that equals 10 because you have another half on each end because there was a little extra. So you have there 10 amos of the back. Rashi tells us that when we get to learn about the beams, he's going to explain how this all worked. So let's go back now that we know that there were 30 amos length from east to west, north to south was 10 amos. Let's understand now how these were placed. He would then lay down the tapestries to the length of the width of the Mishkan, meaning they would cover the entire roof of the Mishkan, and they would hang down Eser Amos Emtzayis, and they would hang down, so you had 10 amos in the center. So from the 28, you had 28 amos, that's the length. 10 on the center, the Gag Cholol Reichav Mishkan, which would cover the center hole of the Mishkan, Va'ama Mikan, Va'ama Mikan, and then an amma would hang down on each side, to the thickness of the krashim. So you have the hollow space was 10, because if you recall, from north to south was 10 amos. On the center, so your center empty space was 10 amos. The actual pole was an amma, so that gives you already 12 amos as the top. She'evim amma. Nishtayru, so you left 28 minus 12, gives you left 16. Ches l'tzafin v'ches l'darim. And it would hang down 8 amos on each side. It would cover the height of the krashim, which were 10. So that means if you looked at the actual tabernacle, 8 amos would hang down on each side. Your bottom 2 handbreadths, your bottom 2 amos, that means the socket and 2 amos of the beams, were revealed, were not covered by the curtains. Now what about the width of the irias, of the tapestries? Arboin was 40 amos. Keshehain muchabaris, when they were connected, because remember there were 20 times 5, gives you 40 total. So there was 20. You had 5 times 4. So that gives you a total of 20. You had 2 sets of 5, gives you 40 amos total. So what they were used. When they were connected, you had Esrim Amal L'chol Cheveres, you have 20 amos for each tapestry. Shloishim, 30 of it went Legag Chalal HaMishkan, went for the empty, because we said the length of the Mishkan was 30. So therefore you have Legag Chalal HaMishkan, L'Orke to its length. V'Ama Keneged David Rashi Krashim Shebemayrav, 1 amma for each thickness of the poles. L'Kasis Evi Amudim Shebemizrach, and as well as the one that were in the east. Shlo Krashim HaMizrach, there weren't that many poles in the east. El-Arba, only 4 of them. Hamasach Parish Vatali Bavavin Shebahem Kimim Vilin Nishtayru Shmoina Amas Atluyin Al Choyra Mishkan. So you had 8 that would hang over in the rest. Sheba Mayrav Ushtei Amas Tachtenis Megulas. The same thing is also, so when you take it to the other way around, so you had 28 total this way, then 40 going this way, 30 for the actual emptiness, 2 for the poles, and then another 8 that would hang down on the back on the west side of the actual tabernacle. And you had 2 amos that were revealed. This I found in the Brisa, which explains the 49 measurements that were there, as we explained, the structure of how the curtains would hang over the tabernacle. Avalam b'Masechta Shabbos. However, and that's what the Brisa says. In the tractate of Shabbos, it's over there it explains. They said that they would actually not cover the front beams in the east, that means on the entranceway of the tabernacle. Teisha amis, and you had the 9 amis that would hang down in the back, which is on the west side. And this you see from our verse where it says this opinion, because they would put the paroiches, which was the curtain that hung in the front, under the hooks. And if you would say that according to the opinion that it was actually hanging over in the east as well, that means that the curtain was hanging lower an amma, that it was hanging on the actual hook. So the question would be, Did the curtain in the front, which was on the entranceway on the east, was it hanging on the top of the poles or underneath the curtain of the front of the poles? Verse 6. Vasisa, chamisha karsizav, you will then make 50 golden clasps, the chibarta sayediyas, and you will connect the tapestries, isha lachaisa, one to its sister, that means one to another, bakrasim with these hooks, v'haya mishkan echad, and then these tapestries will become one. Karsizav, what does this mean? These were like hooks. Machnis and reish nechbel, you would put one hook into the loops, which is one edge. They were like C hooks, and there's actually a discussion if they were C hooks or S hooks, but we're going to assume now they were C hooks, that one edge went into one end and one edge went into the other, and this way you connected the two loops together. And that became one tapestry. The asisa yeriyas izim, the same thing as well. You will then make a cover. You'll make sheets of goat's hair, la'oil, as a tent, ala mishkan, to spread over the tabernacle. Ashtei esra yeriyas tasa isam. You should make 11 of such sheets of goat's hair. Yeriyas izim, Rashi explains, minoitza shalizim, it was made from the hair of goats. La'oil ala mishkan, that this should be as a covering for the tabernacle. Lifris eisin al yeriyas tachtonis, and this would be covered on top of the tapestries that we mentioned before. The Torah then continues and tells us how long these should be. The length of each one of these should be 30 amas long. And it should be wide, 4 amas. Each one of these tapestries. It should be the same measurement. For all the 11 tapestries. Verse 9. Rashi. Rashi explains. If you go by the length, to the width of the Mishkan, that means these goats would then go to these goat hair tapestries would then go to the width of the Mishkan. Like he did the first tapestries, like we explained previously. If you recall, we explained before that the way the other tapestries were put, it left us 2 amas revealing of the beams around the whole Mishkan. Now that these are longer by 2 amas, this would cover the leftovers that were there. So it would cover 1 amma because it was 1 amma longer. So you had 1 amma left. That 1 amma of the beam actually went into the socket. So what you were left seeing, you saw the goat's hair came underneath. Then you saw the silver socket that was there. The verse then continues, verse 9, and then you're going to attach the 5 sheets by themselves, and the 6 sheets by themselves, because remember there were 11, and then you should fold the 6th sheet over the front of the tent. As Rashi is going to explain what this means. You have now a remaining thing, because now it's bigger, so it overlaps. What would you do with it? So then, because I now have the extra, it doesn't mean that each one was double. The back of it was then folded over on the, it was hanging over on the east side, and then you also do, which was by the door, as well as you had then on the west side. And he explains, just like a kala, a modest bride who covers herself with a veil, so too this was the idea that there should be a little bit covering over as well. And how the excess of the tapestry was then folded in the back of the actual tabernacle on the west side, as we're going to see. Verse 10, and then you should make 50 loops on the edge of the endmost first set, the edge of it, which you will then connect it, and then you'll make another 50 loops on the edge of the sheet of the second set as well. So we have these different sheets, and as we mentioned, just like we had by the first set of tapestry, there were 50 loops on each side to be able to connect it. Over here we have that as well. So we have, number 1, we have the front that it was hanging over on the east side, and soon we're going to get to about how it would hang over on the west side as well. You're going to then make In verse 11. Then going to make 50 copper clasps. Chamishim, 50 vevesas akrasim. You'll take those clasps, balulois and the loops, v'chibarta sa'il, and you'll connect these two coverings. V'haya echad, and it will then become one tent. Joining them together using the C clamps. Each one was a cubit in between each one of the a half a cubit between each loop. Using the hooks, they would connect the loops together. Verse 12. And now you had the overlapping remainder of the sheet of the goat here for the tent. You had a half of sheet overhang, which was there, mishkan on the back of the tabernacle. So if you recall, the sheet of goats on the tabernacle from the perspective in the front, we mentioned it was like a bride's veil that hangs over a little bit. But what about the back? So now the back had to then be wrapped around the back of the Mishkan, the back of the tabernacle. So Rashi explains how that was done. Verse 12, Rashi, Al Yeriyas HaMishkan, there was the leftovers on, besides the ones that were beneath, that were already the tapestries that we mentioned. Now, Yeriyas HaElohein Al Yenis. If you notice the terminology that the Torah calls, Yeriyas HaMishkan, the tapestries of the tabernacle and the tapestries of the tent. The tapestries of the tabernacle was those interwoven one with the 4 different materials. This one, as the coats here, is called the tapestries of the tent, and they were the ones on the top, and they're called the tent because they were considered as the overarching, leaping one that was covering the entire tabernacle. Whenever we find the word oil, it means a roof. Because it's covering over what's lower. And these were the ones that were on top of it. So you have half of this tapestry which was hanging over with the 11, because there was 11, the other one was 10, this is 11, so you have the leftover one from the east side. It was folded over towards the face of when somebody would face the actual tent of gathering. As well, you had the 2 amas, 2.5 amas of the half that also went over the back. It would cover over the remaining 2 amas that on the bottom, that if you recall, we mentioned that in the back of and every side of the Mishkan, the first tapestry would only reach 8 amas down, so you had 2 amas revealing. The goat here would then cover the other amma. What does it mean? The back of the Mishkan was tzad maravi, Pesach, because the front was on the east. Shem panav itzaf and darim krin stadim, the north and south were the side. Liyim and the smelt to the right and the left. So now it's going to hang over in the back. You're going to have to fold it, and this way you'll be able to cover everything that's there. Verse 13. You'll have an amma extra from each side, ba'oidef, in the leftover of those sheets. The extra cubit that you have on either end in the length of the sheets, what's going to happen with that? Those are going to be in the length, they shall hang down in the length of the sides of the tabernacle. They will be hanging down on the side, on each side to cover it. So as we mentioned, it goes in the back, the extras, you have the extra 8 amas in the back, then you have, it folds over the sides, going over the other tapestries that were already there. To the north and south, which they were extra on the length of the tapestries of the tabernacle, 2 amas. They will be hanging down to the north and south, like we explained before, north and south of the sides, east and west is front and back. So here the Torah is telling us a way of respect. The person should care about what's nice, meaning therefore, the ones that were on top were covering the ones of the tapestries which were longer, because the nicer ones were on beneath it. So when you walked into the Mishkan, you saw the ones that were of colored, but the outer ones were being protected by the goats here, and this is what they were there for. Verse 14. V'asisa michsa la'oil, and you will make a covering for the tent of gathering, oiris elam adamim, which will be done out of red dyed ram skins, and on top of that is going to be a roof of tachash skins. Verse 14, Rashi explains, what does it mean, michsa la'oil? The roof that we mentioned before, that we already have the goats here. Now you're going to make another roof. I say you're michsa achzer. You're going to make another cover, which this is going to have the ram skin, and on top of that, another one which is going to have michsa kashim the tachar skin. But those were only on top; they would not hang down on the sides. They were the length of shleishim rachban. They were by 30 by 10. Elu divrei Nechemia. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, michsa echot. The ram skin and the tachar skin was one. And just half of it was half was of tachar skin. So you have now the roof of the Mishkan had 3 layers, according to one opinion, 4 layers according to another opinion. You had the multiple mixed combination of wool and linen, which was the bottom layer. On top of that, you had the goat's hair. On top of that, you had the ram skin, and on top of that, the tachar skin. According to the other opinion, the 3rd layer was half tachar skin and half ram skin. This was the covering of the structure of the tabernacle. This concludes the 3rd Torah reading for Parshas Terumah.